Tonight, we're going to drift forward, far, far ahead, into a version of Earth that barely remembers us. The air feels thinner, the light softer, and the horizon glows in muted golds and silvers. Imagine glaciers whispering across continents that no longer resemble the maps you know, and a sun that flickers like an aging lantern at the edge of memory. You wouldn't last long here in reality, but tonight you can explore freely, untouched, unbothered, safe, inside this dream of deep time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing beneath a pale orange sky. The light is diffuse, neither warm nor cold. The sun, swollen but faint, trembles just above the horizon. It's not quite the sun you know. Its surface now unstable, its outer layers whispering outward in soft pulses of hydrogen. Each breath of the star reaches Earth as a languid glow, gentler than it should be, like candlelight diffused through water. The landscape is unfamiliar. There are no cities, no lines of human order. Instead, long continents stretch like the backs of ancient animals, their surfaces cracked and dry. You feel wind, but it carries no scent of flowers or salt, just minerals, dust, the faint memory of iron. Somewhere beneath your feet, tectonic plates still shift, though sluggishly now. The planet's core has cooled, not yet dead, but slower, its heartbeat reduced to a single, deep pulse every few centuries. You walk along a shallow ridge and see what was once a vast inland sea. Its bed is empty now, a plain of salt and quartz. In the distance, glassy dunes catch the faint light and shimmer like mirages. A few pockets of brine still glisten in the cracks, tiny remnants of oceans that once sang with whales and storms. You bend down and touch one. The water is thick, almost syrupy, heavy with dissolved metals. Even here, life might persist, microbial, invisible, stubborn. Scientists believe that extremophiles, organisms that thrive in boiling vents and frozen wastes, could be the last to survive as Earth wanes. You remember reading about Deinococcus radiodurans, a bacterium so resilient it can endure vacuum, radiation, and desiccation. Perhaps some of its distant descendants cling to this last liquid refuge, their DNA looping endlessly, their world no larger than a droplet. The sky changes tint as the sun dips lower, pale tangerine bleeding into deep gray. There's less blue now because the atmosphere's oxygen has long since dwindled. The air feels denser with carbon dioxide, laced with nitrogen, argon, and the sigh of ozone. You imagine how strange it would be to breathe it, Though, of course, here in this dream, you don't need to. You're weightless, immune to time. Far above, the moon hangs smaller than before. Over billions of years, it's drifted away by a few more 1,000 kilometers. Its pull on Earth's tides has weakened, making the oceans sluggish long before they disappeared. You think about how that same gentle gravitational tug once stabilized the planet's tilt, helping to shape seasons and cycles of climate. Without it, Earth's spin would have wobbled unpredictably, an erratic dance that might have hastened the end of habitability. And yet, despite all the decay, there's beauty here. The light refracts through thin clouds of dust, painting the land in iridescent gold. Volcanic glass still glitters, catching the sun's last rays. You feel a calm recognition. This world, though dying, has not lost its grace. You recall how, in the beginning, Earth was molten chaos. Iron sank inward to form a core, while lighter minerals rose to become continents. Oceans condensed from steam, and for eons, the planet spun under meteor showers and starlit storms. Now, at the other end of its story, it's becoming simple again. A quiet sphere returning to mineral stillness. What began in fire ends in dust, as if the planet itself exhales and finally rests. A faint wind stirs across the salt flats. It hums softly through the cracks like a memory of waves. You close your eyes and imagine the sound layered with echoes. The crash of Cretaceous seas, the calls of trilobites, the hush of ancient forests turning to coal. Each whisper belongs to a different age, but all blend together here at the edge of time. You wonder, if someone or something were to find Earth now, long after humanity, what would they think it had been? Would the faint traces of silica glass, the isotopic scars in rock, tell them that a species once measured stars and named oceans? Or would it all seem like the natural fracturing of stone? The question lingers like the horizon itself, endless, unresolved. As night approaches, stars appear sharper, brighter, because the atmosphere no longer scatters their light. You see constellations that once guided sailors, though the sky has drifted over eons. The North Star is gone, replaced by another, unknown to ancient calendars. Somewhere out there, perhaps, other civilizations look up at their suns, unaware that one small blue world once existed here. You feel the ground cooling beneath you. The air still hums faintly, geothermal sighs rising from fissures below. It's peaceful, in a solemn way. The earth, in its last ages, has grown quiet enough for you to hear the rhythm of its silence. You take one last look at the dying sun, now halfway dipped below the rim of the world. Its glow softens, elongates, stretches across the plain like a long, slow breath. The last dawn has begun. You begin to drift across the vastness of this reshaped planet, gliding above a world that feels both ancient and newborn. Below, the continents stretch in patterns unfamiliar to memory, strange, joined, and immense. The Great Plates have continued their endless migration, grinding together into a new supercontinent that sprawls across one hemisphere. It doesn't yet have a name, but scientists once predicted one, Amasia, or perhaps Novo Pangea. Either could be true here, in this imagined ending. You travel above it slowly, like a silent observer, weightless and unseen. Beneath you lies an expanse of fused crust, mountains swallowed by plains, seas evaporated into shimmering basins. The colors have shifted. Where forests once blanketed continents in greens and browns, there's now a palette of ochre, violet dust, and long ribbons of exposed stone. Wind carries fine grains of magnetite and quartz, brushing them over the land in constant motion. You trace the patterns and realize they look like memories of rivers, ghost waterways etched by erosion rather than flow. Once the continents moved at the pace of fingernails, but in this far future, the mantle's heat has waned, and so the plates crawl even more slowly. Still, they move, drawn by residual energy deep below. You sense it, subtle, rhythmic, the last vestiges of Earth's dynamism. Scientists today can still measure this motion, about 2 centimeters per year on average. You wonder how it must feel to a mountain range, 1 billion years old, to inch toward reunion with another across an oceanless void. As you glide lower, you see where 2 continental plates have collided again, thrusting up an enormous plateau. It's arid, like Tibet once was, but vaster, its horizon lost in haze. Tiny fissures split its surface, fault lines so ancient they no longer quake. You pause, hovering above a deep scar where basalt once flowed like ink. Here, beneath the cracked rock, magma still moves sluggishly, glowing a dull red through fractures. A faint warmth rises to meet the thin air. You remember a fact from your waking world, that supercontinents form and dissolve in cycles of roughly 400 to 600 million years, known as the supercontinent cycle. Pangea was just one in a lineage that included Rodinia and Nuna before it. Each time they assembled, they altered the planet's atmosphere, reshaping currents, life, and even the color of the sky. Now, in this twilight of geology, you witness the final convergence, an end to that rhythm. There may never be another cycle after this. You move along the edge of the supercontinent, where a narrow rift valley snakes across the plain. It reminds you of the Great Rift in Africa, though far grander, stretching thousands of kilometers. A single ancient sea has retreated into it, forming a chain of saline lakes. Around the shores, thin crystals grow like frost, whispering in the dry wind. Their faint shimmer catches the dying sunlight, creating the illusion of water where none remains. You wonder whether any life endures here, perhaps deep underground in isolated aquifers or pockets of trapped moisture. On present-day Earth, microbes have been found kilometers beneath the surface, feeding on chemical energy from rock alone. Some survive in crystalline brines, dormant for millions of years, awaiting the next droplet of liquid. It's possible that even now, in this far-off age, something still stirs beneath the dust, slow metabolisms ticking once per century, unaware that their world has ended. You continue north, though directions have little meaning now. The poles have shifted countless times, erasing any magnetic certainty. Somewhere along your journey, the light changes again. The sky, thinner here, glows amber near the horizon, while above, faint auroras flicker without pattern. The magnetic field, weakened by a cooling core, barely holds back the solar wind. Each shimmering veil of light is both beautiful and tragic, a sign of radiation seeping into the atmosphere, unraveling molecules one by one. You pass what was once an ocean trench, now uplifted into high desert. Fossils scatter the surface, not of animals, but of patterns. Trace fossils of microbial mats, filamentous textures impressed in ancient sediment. They glint faintly under the dim light. Once these organisms photosynthesized in shallow seas, building the foundation of all ecosystems to come. Now, their impressions are the final record of life, preserved in a world that has forgotten color. The silence is immense. Even the wind feels more like motion than mine. You notice that when dust moves here, it forms spirals that linger for hours before settling. Gravity hasn't changed, but the air is too still to disperse them. You drift through one of these spirals, and for a moment, it feels like walking through time itself. Each particle carrying traces of continents long gone. Basalt from Gondwana, clay from Laurentia, sand from once green valleys. As you continue your slow passage, the light dims further. The sun, aging, burns through thicker layers of haze, casting a soft copper tone across the land. You remember that as the sun evolves, it brightens, increasing its output by roughly 10% every billion years. Yet paradoxically, the atmosphere here feels dimmer because carbon has vanished from the air, locked into rocks and lost oceans. The balance that once kept the planet alive has shifted beyond repair. You pause above a plateau ridge and imagine what this place might have looked like in your own time. Oceans glittering, winds scented with salt and pine, clouds moving in quick white currents. You picture the continents as they were, Africa sliding north, Australia drifting east, Antarctica cloaked in ice. You wonder if, in some sense, those ancient motions were already leading to this. The thought brings a calm acceptance. Everything moves toward rest eventually. Mountains to plains, rivers to deltas, stars to ash. The rearranged earth beneath you isn't a tragedy. It's a natural quieting, the universe returning borrowed energy. You look once more at the vast merged continent and realize how small even the greatest landmass feels against the eternity of space. The planet, you think, is not dying. It's simply remembering how to be still. You drift lower, tracing the edge of what was once a great ocean basin. The air tastes faintly metallic here, and even though you don't breathe in this dream, you can sense it, a tang of salt ghosts, a memory of tides. Before you stretches an expanse that might once have been the Pacific, though it is now an immense, shallow depression, glinting with sheets of reflective mineral. What remains of the oceans lies scattered across the surface like broken mirrors. The quieting oceans. That's what geologists once called this age in speculative models. A time when evaporation outpaces replenishment, when seas shrink into brine pockets, and hydrothermal plumes turn sluggish. You walk toward one such basin, the cracked ground crunching beneath invisible feet. The soil is crusted with halite and gypsum, shining like frost under the wan sunlight. In the distance, an isolated pool trembles, a faint blue stain surrounded by rings of white salt, like a pupil frozen in an eye that no longer sees. You kneel beside it. The water is dense and slow-moving, more syrup than liquid. You imagine its chemistry: carbonates, silicates, sulfates, all the building blocks of what used to sustain coral reefs and shells. But the corals are long gone, dissolved into calcium ghosts. Once, the oceans teemed with life in infinite forms, jellyfish pulsing in translucent hues, cephalopods spiraling in mathematical grace, plankton breathing oxygen into the sky. Now, that richness has collapsed into chemical silence. A scientific thought crosses your mind. When water evaporates, it leaves behind stories written in crystal. In ancient salt flats on your own Earth, researchers have found microscopic air bubbles, tiny time capsules holding the atmosphere of vanished worlds. You picture someone far in the future or in another corner of the cosmos, finding a fragment of this crystallized plane, releasing within it the last sigh of an Earth long dead. You dip your hand into the brine and feel the temperature, cooler than expected, though the sun blazes faintly above. It's because the oceans regulate heat, or at least they once did. Without vast bodies of water to distribute warmth, the planet's climate has fractured. Extremes dominate: blistering heat near the equator, deep freeze at the poles. The winds that once roared across oceans now move only in slow, languid loops. You glance up. The clouds above are thin, high, and motionless, cirrus remnants, stretched into long, transparent filaments. They shimmer faintly with ice crystals, but produce no rain. Most of the planet's moisture is trapped below the surface now, locked into mineral lattices, or buried as permafrost in the shadows of polar craters. The hydrological cycle, the heartbeat of weather, has slowed to a near standstill. You remember learning that even today, much of Earth's water isn't in the oceans at all. It hides in mantle rock, bound to minerals deep below. Perhaps that's what's left now: oceans turned inward, silent and unseen. Somewhere beneath the crust, in pressurized chambers and crystal cages, water still exists. It will never surface again, but it hums faintly, a subterranean sea breathing through stone. A faint vibration ripples beneath you. Not an earthquake, just the planet's own sigh. The crust creaks as temperature gradients shift below, creating miniature convection patterns. It's strange to imagine that even now, Earth isn't fully still. Heat still leaks outward from the core, though it's only a fraction of what it once was. In the present world, geothermal vents spew mineral-rich water heated by radioactive decay. Billions of years from now, that decay slows, and the vents flicker out one by one. You picture those vents, deep in the ancient oceans, as the possible cradle of life. Scientists still debate it, the hydrothermal origin hypothesis. Life may have begun in those black smokers, feeding on chemical gradients instead of sunlight. If that's true, then life's story began in the depths, and perhaps it will end there too. Somewhere in these shrinking pools, maybe deep below them, microscopic forms still linger, their metabolisms glacially slow, their purpose simple: endure. You stand and listen. The basin echoes faintly with the hiss of salt shifting under heat. It sounds almost like the distant crash of surf. You imagine that, in the planet's final days, these sounds are all that remain of the ocean's voice, a faint resonance shaped by wind and mineral, carrying no water at all. Far on the horizon, you spot something rising from the plain. A jagged structure, perhaps coral long fossilized, now exposed by eons of retreat. You walk toward it, each silent. Up close, it's not coral, but silica, petrified remnants of ancient diatom shells fused into a single mass. Their delicate geometry remains visible, fractal patterns, lattices of perfect symmetry, still shimmering under the dying light. The diatoms once filled the oceans with oxygen and beauty. Their shells, made of glass, sank to the seafloor to form opaline sediment. Now, that same glass catches the last sunlight of the planet. You brush a hand across the smooth surface and feel static, like faint electricity, as if the world remembers the pulse of photosynthesis. You pause to reflect. The oceans once covered 70% of Earth's surface. They dictated weather, evolution, and even the rhythm of human history. Now, in this quiet hour of geologic twilight, they've receded into memory. The balance between rock and water has reversed. The solid planet has reclaimed what was fluid. A curious thought drifts through your mind, one that sometimes scientists entertain. Could the oceans ever return? Could comets rich in ice one day collide with this quiet planet and seed it anew? It's possible, though unlikely. By then, the sun's energy would be too erratic, its radiation too fierce. Still, the imagination persists. The universe, after all, is not without surprises. You climb a small ridge, And from there, the entire basin stretches before you like a map drawn in light. The air vibrates faintly with heat, distorting the horizon into waves. You keep walking, though distance means little now. There's no destination, only movement, a slow glide through the long breath of time. Ahead, the land rises in patient undulations, the remnants of a mountain chain, worn nearly flat by wind and gravity. The air hums faintly, like the distant resonance of an empty shell. This is where mountains have come to rest. The ground beneath you tells stories written in layers. Once, colossal peaks stood here, sharp, snow-crowned, echoing with thunder and rain. They rose when continents collided, when pressure folded rock upon rock and forced stone to remember motion. You imagine the Himalayas in their youth, or the Andes thrusting skyward, their summits piercing cloud. But those were temporary sculptures. Even the highest mountains yield to time. Wind shears them, rivers carve them, frost splits their faces. Every peak becomes sand. You pass through valleys filled with soft sediments, fine as flour. Each grain is a fossil of movement, once a part of something larger. There's a strange peace in it, the idea that grandeur dissolves into gentleness. You pick up a handful of dust and let it drift through your fingers. It glows faintly, catching the orange light. Somewhere in its chemistry lies calcium from ancient shells, iron from old blood, and silica from forgotten forests. Everything that lived has returned to this quiet blend. You recall a fact you once read. The average mountain lasts only about 100 million years before erosion levels it down. It feels almost human in scale, an age that fits inside imagination. Even Everest, tallest of them all, is shrinking grain by grain. But here, in this far-off epic, erosion has had its final word. No jagged edges remain, only rolling plains and softened ridges that feel almost like memory itself. You climb a slope made of compressed dust and find yourself overlooking what once a continental divide. The horizon stretches endlessly, no rivers carving its flanks, no clouds hugging its crest. Wind shapes the surface now, slow, persistent, tireless. Each gust removes a fraction of height, carrying it elsewhere, redistributing the remains of ancient glory. A curious thought surfaces. What does a mountain dream of as it erodes? You imagine it sensing each grain lost, each curve softened, until it becomes inseparable from the plain. There's a lesson in that, whispered gently by the landscape. Even the most enduring structures yield to stillness. Nothing resists forever. You notice a ripple in the air, heat rising from the plains below. The atmosphere, thinner than before, distorts light into fluid motion. You step closer to the edge and look down upon what appears to be a canyon, though it's not carved by water, but by centuries of wind abrading soft rock. The walls are smooth, curved like bone. Dust swirls inside, shimmering in faint copper tones. Geologists once studied wind erosion on Mars, fascinated by how it mimicked Earth's ancient deserts. Here, on this future planet, Earth has become its own red twin. The absence of vegetation exposes rock to unbroken decay. In the faint distance, you see streaks, iron oxide veins that gleam like old scars. They tell of oxygen long gone, of a world that once breathed. As you descend into the hollow, a subtle sound emerges, tiny grains striking one another, a dry, whispering hiss. It builds and fades with each breath of air, creating a rhythm you can almost mistake for water. You let the illusion linger. The mind wants to find patterns, even in silence. At the canyon's floor, the ground glows faintly in reflected light. Thin sheets of mica glitter underfoot, layered like forgotten pages. You bend down and notice something extraordinary. Faint lines etched across the rock, parallel and delicate. They're fossilized roots, impressions of ancient plants that once clung to soil in the age of forests. The roots are perfectly preserved, tracing the shape of something long vanished. You think of trees, their patient growth, their silent communication through fungal networks. That hidden conversation shaped ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years. Now, only these shadows remain, inscribed in rock like quiet signatures. You rise again and keep walking. The sun hangs low, its disk larger than you remember. The light has deepened into amber, scattering less with each passing millennium. The mountains around you have turned into silhouettes, soft as sand dunes. In the far distance, you see something rising, a solitary spire of granite that somehow survived the erosion. You make your way toward it. It's enormous up close, a tower of stone riddled with fractures. Its base is surrounded by dunes of powdered quartz. You run your hand along its surface, feeling grooves formed by wind-blown dust. This lone monolith may once have been part of a massive range, but now it stands isolated, a monument to persistence. You remember another geological truth. Granite resists erosion because it crystallizes deep within the earth, cooling slowly, forming interlocking minerals that hold together even under eternity's pressure. You lean against the stone, feeling its faint warmth stored from the sun. For a moment, it feels alive, not in any biological sense, but as something that has endured too much to be called inert. You imagine it remembering every sunrise, every storm, every footstep across ages. A breeze moves through the canyon again, stirring the dust into motion. It circles the granite spire in a slow spiral, rising toward the fading sky. You watch as light catches the grains and scatters them outward, carrying pieces of mountain into the horizon. That's how mountains die, not in explosions or collapse, but in quiet dispersal, grain by grain, until they become clouds of memory floating through air. You turn your gaze westward, where the land stretches smoother, emptier. The world seems to exhale, releasing the last of its high places. Somewhere beyond, continents flatten into endless plains, where gravity's patience completes its work. You feel a softness within yourself, matching the landscape. The loss here doesn't sting, it soothes. There's something profoundly peaceful in watching the tallest things surrender. You take one last look at the granite spire, glowing faintly in the amber light, and begin your slow descent toward the plains. The mountains have turned to dust, and still the earth endures. You walk until the land smooths itself out completely. The horizon stretches in every direction, a near-perfect circle of pale orange haze. The air feels lighter here, thin, transparent, as if it's forgotten how to carry sound. You lift your gaze, and for a moment, it's difficult to tell where sky ends and space begins. The light has changed again, softer, almost pastel. The blue that once defined Earth's atmosphere is gone. The sky grows thin. Above you, the heavens look different now. Not quite familiar, not entirely alien. The scattering that once painted the sky azure has faded, because the molecules responsible for it, oxygen, nitrogen, trace gases, have dwindled. What remains is a tenuous veil of carbon dioxide and argon, barely thick enough to glow. You can almost see stars even in daylight, faint glimmers trembling through the dim air. You take a slow step forward, as if the act itself might disturb the quiet equilibrium. The ground beneath your feet hums faintly, perhaps from distant geothermal movements, but even that feels muted. The sky is so clear it gives the illusion of stillness, yet everything above you is in motion. Particles escaping, radiation flowing outward, gravity holding on by degrees. You recall how Rayleigh scattering once filled the sky with color. Short wavelengths, blue and violet, bounced through air molecules, creating that familiar hue of day. But here, with fewer molecules to scatter light, the sun's glow passes almost unfiltered, pale and direct. The world feels closer to space now. Even the shadows have softened. The sun itself looks older. You can see granulation on its surface, mottled patterns of convection like golden cells. It swells slightly larger in the sky, a reminder of its nearing instability. You feel its warmth, not harsh, but insistent, like a memory of summer that never fades. Stars age by consuming themselves. This one has been burning hydrogen for over 10 billion years. Soon, it will begin fusing helium in earnest, growing redder, more erratic. You tilt your head, noticing faint streaks crossing the heavens, meteors dissolving silently in the thinning air. They burn higher now because friction begins sooner when the atmosphere is shallow. Once, these falling stones were countless. Now, fewer reach the planet at all. Space itself has grown quieter. You pause for a moment to listen. It's strange, the absence of sky sounds. No thunder, no wind that howls, no faint rush of air against your ears. The atmosphere is too thin to carry volume. Yet you can feel movement, small eddies brushing past your face like cool silk. In the distance, you see a shimmer, a faint rainbow halo circling the sun, though the colors are wrong. They're muted, inverted, more silver than spectral. You remember reading about this, a 22-degree halo caused when sunlight refracts through ice crystals high in the atmosphere. It means there's still moisture aloft, though barely. Perhaps this is one of the last times the planet will form such a thing. You let your eyes rest on the halo, imagining how countless generations once saw similar sights. Shepherds, sailors, wanderers, all looking upward, drawing omens from the sky. Now, only you remain to witness this final display. Something flickers across your memory. The first skies, billions of years ago, before oxygenation. Back then, Earth's atmosphere was tinted orange with methane and haze. The young sun shone fainter, and yet the planet thrived with microbial life, its air dense with chemistry. What you see now in this far twilight is a strange echo of that beginning, a return to simplicity, to quiet gases and dim light. The circle of life and decay doesn't just belong to biology, it belongs to the air itself. You walk further, watching as the color overhead shifts from amber to violet gray. The stars emerge one by one. Some you recognize, old companions from your time. But many are gone, their light erased by distance and change. You find comfort in the ones that remain. Vega, Arcturus, the faint belt of Orion, distorted by the slow dance of stellar drift. Even constellations dissolve, given enough time. A faint hum touches your mind, and you realize it's memory, satellites, aircraft, the invisible architecture of modern skies. All gone now, long absorbed into the planet's crust or burned away. You imagine how strange it must have looked to earlier civilizations, to see trails of light crossing night skies, unaware they were human-made. That age feels impossibly brief now, a flicker in cosmic history. You pause beside a cracked ridge of sediment. Embedded in its face are thin layers of glassy rock, tektites formed by ancient impacts. They gleam faintly, reflecting the colorless sun. You run your hand along them and feel their smoothness, their delicate fusion. Each was born in violence, a meteor strike, molten earth splashing skyward. But time has transformed them into ornaments of peace. The thin sky stretches above, vast and open. Without dense air to diffuse sunlight, the stars at the horizon sparkle even as the sun lingers. You find yourself floating between day and night, as if the boundary itself has blurred. You recall a lesser-known fact about Earth's atmosphere. Without the protective layer of magnetism and ozone, ultraviolet radiation would sterilize the surface in hours. Yet for now, the remaining gases and magnetic remnants still hold enough to shield what's left beneath the ground. Somewhere deep below, in caverns and mineral seams, extremophiles may still exist, survivors of light's cruelty. You breathe in the stillness, not with lungs, but through awareness. The thin air feels weightless, but it carries history in every molecule. argon from the first volcanic eruptions, nitrogen from primordial oceans, carbon dioxide exhaled by forests long gone. You're standing within the ghost of breath itself. A gentle wind stirs. Dust lifts and spirals upward, higher and higher until it disappears. The particles glimmer faintly as they rise, each one carrying a trace of what was. A mineral from an ancient reef, a speck of old mountain, a flake of clay that once held a footprint. You watch them ascend, knowing they will drift for centuries before settling again. You walk for a long while, though time no longer feels measurable. The light has softened to a muted gold, and the thin sky trembles faintly with cold. Ahead, a dark horizon brews, a slow, gathering shape that shimmers in the dying sunlight. For a moment, you think it might be dust or heat haze, but as you draw closer, you hear a sound you haven't heard in what feels like forever, the faint, rhythmic sigh of falling water. The last rain. It comes not as a storm, but as a whisper. A single weary cloud floats above a hollow in the land, heavy with vapor drawn from one of the last surviving brine pools. Its underside glows like brushed silver, trembling under its own weight. You stand beneath it, looking up as the first droplets descend, thick, slow, perfectly round. They fall into dust with soft taps, raising tiny puffs that vanish instantly. You reach out. One drop lands on your hand. It feels heavy, rich with minerals. When it slides off your skin, it leaves behind a faint, crystalline trace, as if even the rain has turned to glass. The scent that follows is faint but familiar, ozone and stone, like a memory of spring distilled through eternity. You think of the last storm of the modern age, perhaps millions of centuries ago. Back then, the water cycle still churned through oceans, rivers, and clouds. Evaporation fed convection, and the skies released their charge in thunder. That system has nearly ended now. The air no longer holds enough moisture to sustain true weather. This small cloud is likely a relic, a final echo of atmospheric memory, the planet exhaling what little it has left. You begin to follow it. The cloud drifts lazily eastward, shedding itself as it goes. Each drop lands with reverence, darkening the dust for a few seconds before vanishing. You notice that the water leaves behind faint streaks of color, rust red and violet, formed by reacting with iron oxides in the soil. The rain paints brief patterns that evaporate almost before your eyes, like writing erased as soon as it's drawn. For a moment, the air smells alive again. Moisture amplifies scent, and you catch hints of ancient salt, metal, and the faint sweetness of decomposed organics buried in the dust. It's the smell of memory itself, awakened by contact. You close your eyes and imagine forests breathing again, moss soaking up droplets, rivers swelling with runoff. A quiet fact surfaces in your mind. Even today, scientists have discovered rain that never reaches the ground. Virga, they call it, falling from clouds only to evaporate in dry air. That's what this is, you realize. The last virga of Earth. The rain's fall is a gesture more than a function, a ritual performed for no one. Yet, in its futility, there's beauty. The world continues its rhythm, even when no one remains to measure it. You tilt your face upward. The drops fall on your cheeks, cool for a moment, then gone. They leave behind faint crystalline residue, sparkling under the dim light. You feel almost baptized by the planet's final weather. The cloud above grows thinner, its center hollowing like a sigh. You can see sunlight piercing through it now, turning each drop into a prism. For a heartbeat, a ghostly rainbow appears, colorless, nearly invisible, but there. The last arc of refracted light this world will ever see. You stand silently as it fades. When the rain stops, the silence feels immense. The air cools quickly, moisture flashing into vapor. The ground hardens again, as if rejecting what it just received. You kneel and touch the earth. It's slick for a moment, but the dampness evaporates between your fingers. What remains is a faint sheen of minerals, like frost on metal. You start walking again, following the fading line of the cloud's shadow. It drifts toward a low plain where shallow puddles have gathered. Their surfaces shimmer like mercury, trembling with faint ripples of wind. You lean over one and see your reflection wavering, distorted by dust and time. Around its edges, strange crystals bloom, branching in dendritic forms. You recognize them, halite structures, the same that once formed in evaporating salt lakes. They grow upward, as if reaching for something they no longer remember. A soft breeze passes, carrying a hollow whistle through the plain. The air hums faintly, perhaps the ghost of thunder. You close your eyes and imagine it real. Clouds swelling black, lightning cracking through ozone, rain slamming down on green fields. You can almost hear it, the lush chaos of life responding to water's arrival. But when you open your eyes again, the sound has gone. The breeze falls silent. The world exhales. You remember reading once that water is not only life's medium, but its memory. It carries traces of everything it touches: the salts of the ocean, the breath of volcanoes, the ash of forests. Perhaps this last rain carries it all, the sum of Earth's history condensed into one final cycle. You kneel again beside the puddle, watching it shrink. The surface tension pulls inward, drawing the edges into a shrinking orb before it collapses completely. The last ripple fades. The reflection breaks. You look up. The cloud has dissolved. Only a faint wisp remains, dispersing into sunlight. And you wonder quietly, is this the last rain, or just the last you will witness? Could the planet still gather enough heat, enough vapor, for one more brief rainfall in some lonely valley? The question lingers, unanswered. Nature rarely ends in absolutes. It tapers, softens, whispers away. The wind returns, brushing across your shoulders like the gentlest farewell. It carries with it the faint, crystalline dust of the evaporated rain, scattering it across the plains. For an instant, the air glitters with microscopic mirrors, refracting the dying sun into a haze of silver. You watch until the shimmer fades. Then, with quiet acceptance, you turn away. Behind you, the earth dries. The last rain has come and gone, leaving the sky clear, the ground bare, and the air empty of scent. You keep walking. The silence deepens. The light fades toward amber again. And above, the sun breathes quietly, as if waiting for its own turn to change. The world is warm again. Not because of the air, but because the light itself has changed. The sun no longer shines with the steady, golden calm you once knew. Its surface flickers in restless patterns, each pulse a breath in the stars' long, slow unraveling. You lift your gaze, and the horizon glows with an almost liquid brilliance. Shadows have softened, colors blur into one another. The dimming sun. You feel it before you understand it. The sunlight is heavier now, more insistent, as if it carries weight. When it touches the dust beneath your feet, it bleeds into red and copper, staining the air with warmth that never fades. The sun has grown old. For most of its life, it burned hydrogen into helium with a steady rhythm, quiet, dependable, like a heartbeat. But now it begins to stumble. The hydrogen in its core is nearly gone, and the balance that held it together falters. You remember reading once how stars like ours die, not in violence at first, but in expansion. As hydrogen depletes, the core contracts under gravity, heating up until the outer layers swell outward. The star becomes vast and bright, a red giant pulsing with unstable light. You realize that's what you're seeing now. The sun is larger, closer, and though its edges blur in the thin air, you can feel its size like a presence watching everything. The landscape glows in strange hues: burnt sienna, amber, soft rose. You can no longer tell where sunlight ends and reflected heat begins. The temperature here fluctuates in waves, each one lasting longer than the last. The planet's orbit hasn't changed much, but the sun's output has doubled. You imagine what that means for anything still clinging to life. Even the deepest caverns must now hum with warmth. You glance upward again and notice a faint halo around the sun, not from ice this time, but from dust. The planet's surface has dried into endless plains, and wind lifts fine grains high into the thinning atmosphere. Each particle catches light and scatters it in soft gradients. The result is breathtaking, a glowing ring that seems to cradle the dying star. It's the planet's final tribute to its maker. There's a gentle irony in it. For billions of years, the sun's energy sustained life here, drove weather, nurtured forests, shimmered on oceans. And now, in its overabundance, it ends that same cycle. Too much of a good thing, you think, but said without judgment. Even stars have their limits. You feel warmth building on your skin, not burning, not searing, just pervasive. It seeps into your bones, your thoughts, your sense of distance. The air shimmers with it, forming mirages that stretch and waver. You can no longer trust the horizon. Everything looks fluid. A small depression ahead catches your attention. It's filled with a dark, glassy material, molten rock that has cooled into obsidian. You step closer and see that it's cracked into delicate hexagonal patterns, like dry clay, but black as night. You remember how, even now, volcanic activity hasn't completely ceased. The mantle still breathes, though faintly. In the planet's final ages, internal heat continues to surface through fractures, venting the planet's last energy into space. You look down into the glass and catch a reflection, not clear, but distorted, refracted through layers of color. Behind your reflection, the sun looms enormous, half the sky filled with fire. It feels almost intimate, like standing before a giant heart that beats too slowly. You recall a lesser-known fact. When the sun enters its red giant phase, it will shed nearly a third of its mass, releasing solar winds strong enough to strip planetary atmospheres. Mercury and Venus will likely be engulfed. Earth's fate is uncertain. It may survive as a scorched rock or drift outward, spared but unrecognizable. Scientists debate it endlessly. You wonder which version you're walking through now. You notice something peculiar near the horizon, a shimmer, bright and rhythmic, almost like lightning, but too slow. It pulses every few minutes, casting waves of color across the plains. You realize it's the sun's surface flaring, massive eruptions of plasma arcing outward, looping through space before collapsing back. They rise higher than planets once did. Each flare carries more energy than all of human history combined. And yet here they are silent, graceful, almost tender. You pause to watch one unfold. It curls outward in slow motion, forming a golden loop, its light bending through the dust-filled air. The flare fades, leaving behind a faint aurora at the edge of the atmosphere. The colors ripple like silk, bronze fading to pale lavender, then gone. You find yourself smiling, not out of joy, but awe. Even in its decay, the star performs with elegance. You start walking again, though the heat presses harder now. The ground feels soft beneath your steps, as if melting. The thin crust radiates warmth from below, where trapped gases expand with each solar surge. Small fissures open around you, releasing faint plumes of steam. They smell of metal and stone, an ancient scent, familiar yet distant. You remember how, billions of years ago, this same process gave birth to oceans. Steam from volcanic vents condensed into rain, cooling the surface until seas formed. Now, in reverse, that same steam escapes into space, closing the cycle. Creation and dissolution, perfectly mirrored. The light dims briefly, and for a moment you wonder if the sun has waned. But it's only a fluctuation, a tremor in its fusion rhythm. These variations are precursors, you recall, to the instability that will soon consume it entirely. When the helium core ignites fully, the star will pulse violently, expanding and contracting until it sheds its outer layers. That's when the solar system will dissolve into nebulae, glowing like stained glass against the dark. You close your eyes and imagine that future. Earth, perhaps already lifeless, bathed in ribbons of light. The sun, a vast translucent shell drifting outward. And somewhere within that radiance, the memory of this walk, your quiet witness to the final warmth. When you open your eyes again, the air has turned golden, thick with haze. The sun's edge flickers, trembling as if breathing faster. You walk into brightness that isn't warm, a kind of lucid glow that seems to rise from the ground rather than shine from the sky. The light scattered across the plain is ice, not sand, and it reaches to every horizon, a mirror laid along the waistline of the planet. You test a step and hear the softest creak, like a whisper beneath glass. The air is thinner than you remember from the salt flats, cleaner too, stripped of scent and almost flavorless. The equator is frozen. At first, your mind resists the idea. The equator was once the belt of heat, the region where monsoons gathered and jungles breathed. But the world has shifted. With oceans hushed and air peeled away, the planet no longer spreads warmth efficiently. The sun still breathes in copper pulses, but the surface answers with silence, returning light instead of keeping it. Ice brightens the ground, raising the albedo, and each reflected ray invites more cold, a feedback you can feel in your shoulders. You exhale, and your breath turns to sparkling dust that falls and disappears, as if the world has forgotten how to hold vapor. You step forward, and the ice clarifies beneath your feet, not a chaotic crust, but a careful architecture of ridges and grooves aligned with the wind. The surface is combed into sastrugi, snow sculptures carved by relentless drift, diminished now to low, frozen waves that guide your footsteps like braided paths. You trace a hand along one ridge and feel the furrows, sharp on the windward side, feathered on the lee. The patterns echo the dunes you crossed when mountains turned to dust, a soft callback from rock to snow, from one patient sculptor to another. You kneel, letting your weight press into the crust until a faint note reaches your ears, a tiny tone that seems to vibrate inside the ice itself. Glaciers sing, you remember, hearing born from friction, meltwater pulses, and shifting crystals. In your time, people recorded these songs, hums and chirps that rose as temperatures changed, as if the ice spoke in music about the weather it was wearing. Here, the song is quiet, but present, a thin glass harp plucked by a slow breath of wind. You look up to a sky that is not quite day, not quite night. The sun is pale, caught behind high, exhausted haze, and stars peer through the brightness like pinholes. The horizon whispers with halos, 22-degree rings that have lost their color, only silver now, traced by ice dust lofted from the surface. The world is a dim lantern held inside its own frost. You remember a scientific fact that once surprised you in warmer ages. The geological record holds evidence that Earth wore equatorial ice before, the Cryogenian, when glacial deposits formed near the tropics. Banded iron layers paused, and life squeezed through cold seams. Some scientists call it snowball Earth. Others prefer slush ball, arguing for strips of open water where photosynthesis persisted. The debate felt academic back then, charming in its distance. Here, walking the frozen equator, the question feels immediate again. Is everything sealed, or are there dark cracks somewhere, rifts where rock breathes and water remembers to be liquid? You scan the plain for answers and find a series of low, serrated fields rising out of the glare, like ranks of ancient monks facing the sun. Up close, they resolve into penitentes, upright blades of sculpted ice, each with a thin, shadowed trough at its base. You knew these existed on high Andean plateaus, sculpted by sublimation rather than melt, but seeing them at the planet's waistline feels like reading a word in a book where you didn't expect a language. The blades tilt toward the light, yet survive because their shadows preserve chill. You slide your hand between two towers and feel colder air slumbering there, as if the planet collects what cold it has and tucks it into careful creases. The equatorial glacier isn't smooth. It flows slowly, so slowly that you mistake its motion for stillness. Crevasses cross the plain in patient zigzags, blue as thought. That blue is another tidbit you carry from earlier days. Thick ice is blue because it absorbs the longer red wavelengths of sunlight and scatters the short ones back. The deeper the ice, the bluer the heart. You gaze into one crevasse and see a column of color descending into quiet, a frozen sky beneath your feet. Beneath that sky, perhaps, are the last warm places. You think again of the planet's faint heartbeat, those deep geothermal sighs you felt along the drained basins and eroded mountains. Heat still leaks outward, imperfect and generous. If any liquid water persists, it hides under the ice, pressurized and black, an abyssal river humming over rock. On your Earth, subglacial lakes lay under Antarctica, sealed for millions of years and lively with microbes. If a final ecosystem hangs on here, it might be in such a lake, lit only by chemistry,
a library of patient genes reading themselves by touch. The wind rises, not strong, just steady, combing the surface into a brighter sheen. You notice that the ice bears faint lines of dust, seasonal ghost stripes that record each breath of the sun. In warmer ages, these layers were annual rings. Now the cadence is stranger, tied not to summer and winter, but to the sun's uncertain pulse and the planet's altered tilt. Axial tilt matters. You remember how Milankovitch cycles, tilt, wobble, and orbital shape, once braided climate into ice ages and warm spells. Here, with the moon far away, and the core's dynamo faltering, obliquity may wander without a lunar hand to steady it. Seasons could tilt wild, then slacken, then tilt again, slowly carving new grammar into ice. It's an open question. Without the moon's stabilizing pull, how far could Earth lean? And how many ways can a planet learn to winter? You walk toward a low scarp where the glacier calves into a valley of stone. The break is clean, glassy, and quiet. No thunder, there isn't enough air to carry drama. A plate-sized slab slides, tips, and settles with a sigh that could be your own. The face it reveals is banded with delicate white seams, frozen brine lines like tiny capillaries. You press your palm to the wall and feel nothing but thought. It's like touching a page.
You descend from the ice, moving into shadow. The air grows still again, quieter than before. Beneath the frozen plains lies a labyrinth of caverns, stone vaults layered by pressure and time. Here, the world feels inward, like it's folding itself away from the light. You kneel beside a fissure, wide enough to slip through, and feel warmth rising from below. The planet is cooling, but not dead. Somewhere deep within, heat still hums, faint but faithful. Life retreats underground. You lower yourself into the darkness, guided by the faint glow of minerals. The rock is smooth and veined with faint luminescence, stripes of calcite, quartz, and something else, something that seems to breathe with dim blue light. Perhaps bioluminescent fungi, or descendants of ancient chemotrophs that once thrived near hydrothermal vents. Whatever they are, they've adapted to this new age of silence. The air inside the cavern feels thicker. It carries traces of moisture, metallic and cool. You walk carefully, your steps echoing softly. Each sound ripples outward, fading quickly, swallowed by depth. The walls are slick, and faint droplets slide down their surfaces, collecting in shallow pools. You crouch to look closer. The water here is clear, almost too clear. But beneath its surface, you see faint movement, tiny filament-like strands shifting in rhythm. They look like colonies of bacteria, threads weaving through the water in slow spirals. You think of Desulforudus audax viator, the microbe found living 2 miles below Earth's surface in your own age, thriving in isolation, feeding on hydrogen and sulfur rather than sunlight. It was once called the bold traveler. Perhaps its descendants remain, having journeyed down into the crust to survive the end of surface life. You imagine how they endure. Without photosynthesis, they live by chemical whispers, oxidizing iron, reducing sulfur, exchanging electrons across mineral walls. They form mats that shimmer faintly in the dark, and when disturbed, they release faint bioluminescence, like starlight trapped in droplets. You watch the light fade, pulse, and fade again. It's the closest thing to heartbeat this world has left. You continue deeper. The cavern narrows, then opens into a vast chamber where the ceiling disappears into mist. Columns of rock rise like the ribs of some colossal being. In the distance, you hear faint dripping, the slow architecture of stalactites building themselves molecule by molecule. Some of these formations must have taken millions of years to grow, each droplet carrying a grain of calcium carbonate from the ceiling to the floor. You pause to listen. The dripping becomes rhythm, patient and even. You realize it's the only consistent sound you've heard in ages. It feels alive. You take another step and notice the floor beneath you is damp, almost soft. Filmy layers of microbial mats coat the stone, glistening faintly. Their surfaces quiver when air shifts, as if they're aware of your presence. You kneel and press a hand near them, not touching, just feeling the radiant heat that rises from below. The rock is warm to the touch, maybe 50 degrees warmer than the air above. The geothermal gradient remains. It's not much, but enough to sustain life here, in pockets, warm refuges hidden from the sun's excess. You think of other survivors, tardigrades perhaps, encysted in layers of dust, bacterial spores locked in crystalline shells, extremophiles resting in the pores of rock. Earth has always been stubborn about life. Even in mass extinctions, something small and unnoticed endured. Maybe that's what life truly is, a refusal to silence. You move on. The path slopes downward, winding around columns of dark stone. Your hand brushes over rough textures, and you feel how porous the rock is. There are tiny holes, like lungs that once breathed steam. Perhaps they still do, in a geological sense. Each pore might hold moisture, gas, and the faint electric potential of minerals reacting with heat. Scientists once discovered that entire microbial ecosystems could exist on rock energy alone, radiotrophs that fed on radiation, using its energy to drive metabolism. You wonder if they've evolved further here, tuned to the faint hum of Earth's decaying isotopes. Perhaps they now live in elegant simplicity, using the world's last warmth to power chemistry that will continue long after everything else has cooled. The tunnel bends again, and you notice a faint current of air. You follow it and emerge into a smaller chamber, half filled with crystalline structures that glitter faintly. They grow in clusters, angular and precise, like frozen flowers. You recognize them: gypsum and selenite, minerals that form from evaporated brines. But these have grown in darkness, nourished by slow drips of mineral-laden water. You sit for a moment among the crystals. Their surfaces refract the dim glow into soft arcs of light. The air hums faintly with static, perhaps piezoelectric discharge from stress within the rock. You close your eyes, and the sensation feels almost like breathing alongside the planet itself. When you open them again, you notice something faintly moving on a crystal face, a thread-like organism creeping along its edge. It leaves behind a trail of iridescent film, perhaps a microbial network, perhaps something more complex, a multicellular descendant adapted entirely to mineral life. Its motion is rhythmic, deliberate, but patient. There's no rush here. Time has slowed enough that survival itself is a kind of meditation. You think back to the surface, the frozen equator, the last rain, the dim sun. Up there, the world seems still, almost finished. But down here, hidden in the planet's quiet arteries, life persists, not in abundance, but in intent. It's enough to change your understanding of endings. You rise and place your hand on the cavern wall. The warmth beneath your palm feels like a faint pulse, not of life exactly, but of continuity. You remember a saying from an old geology lecture: "The Earth is not dead, it's just resting between breaths." You smile at that. It feels truer here than ever before. You walk back toward the fissure, the faint bioluminescence following you like will-o-wisps, guiding you toward the surface. The air grows thinner again, cooler. When you emerge, the sunlight feels alien, too bright after the patience of darkness. You blink and look out across the plain. The world seems emptier, but somehow more complete. Above the frozen land and eroded...
The climb back into daylight that looks less like light and more like memory, thin, diffused, a film of gold spread over quiet stone. The world feels slower now, as though the air itself is weary from holding so much stillness. Above you, the sun seems to drift in place, lingering low on the horizon, even though hours pass. You walk until you realize the pattern. The day is stretching. The long twilight. You pause on a ridge and watch the sky turn from amber to violet without ever reaching true night. The sun no longer rises or sets in any way you'd recognize. It hovers, gliding in long arcs near the horizon. The tilt of the planet has changed again, its axis perhaps locked or wobbling irregularly, its rotation dragging under tidal friction. Days have lengthened into weeks, maybe months. Night is no longer the other half of day. It's part of the same breath. You feel the air cooling and warming in slow rhythm, like the planet itself is breathing in geological time. Shadows stretch for miles, frozen in half motion. Rocks gleam on one side and frost on the other. It's a world caught between day and night, sunlight and starlight, warmth and the slow promise of freeze. The ground beneath you vibrates faintly, not a quake, but a deep, steady resonance. You remember how Earth's rotation has been slowing since its formation, by just a few milliseconds per century. The moon's gravitational pull siphoned angular momentum, lengthening days even in your time. In this far future, those lost milliseconds have added up. A single rotation could now take weeks or even longer. You look up, instinctively searching for the moon, but it's not there. It's drifted too far away to dominate the sky. You'll find it again later when the light changes, but for now, the heavens belong to the sun and the faint bloom of nearby stars. You start walking east, though direction feels symbolic now. The land beneath your feet changes color as the light angles through the dusty air: peach, lavender, gray. Each hue lasts hours. You wonder how life adapted to this rhythm when it first began to change. Plants once reached toward the sun each day. How did they stretch when day itself became a season? You recall a curious fact. During the Devonian period, when forests first blanketed the continents, days lasted only about 21 hours. The planet spun faster then, its skies brighter and winds stronger. Now, at the far end of time, that speed has dwindled. It's humbling to think that the length of a day has been changing all along. Every rotation slightly different, every sunset a step toward this infinite dusk. The air has grown cooler. You can see faint streaks of cloud, high cirrus ribbons trailing across the upper atmosphere. They don't move, they only dissolve, unraveling over days instead of minutes. You notice how the shadows lengthen and bend, not just from the sun's low angle, but because light itself travels through a thicker, dustier medium now. The horizon glows permanently, a band of molten orange fading into gray-blue above. You pause by a shallow depression where the dust has settled into circular patterns. Each ring seems to shimmer with residual heat, though no fire burns there. Perhaps thermal inertia, remnant warmth from long daylight pooled in stone. You crouch and place your hand near the ground. It feels faintly warm, even as frost gathers at its edges. Warmth and cold coexist, unable to separate cleanly anymore. You look west again. The sun hovers close to the horizon, swollen, distorted. Its light refracts through layers of dust, forming multiple false suns above it, parhelia, sundogs of an exhausted world. They shimmer faintly, then merge back into the main glow. The effect is disorienting, like the sky can't decide how many stars it still has left to follow. You realize how quiet the world has become. The long day silences motion. Even wind seems hesitant, trapped in its own inertia. Yet there's still rhythm here. You can hear a faint hum in the distance, like pressure adjusting deep underground. It reminds you of the pulse you felt in the caverns below, the heartbeat of a planet unwilling to stop completely. You think of time differently now. If one day lasts a month, what is a year? How does the planet mark age when seasons blur into light that never ends? Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps Earth has transcended time's measure, existing now only in cycles of energy and rest. You sit on a boulder, worn smooth by ages of temperature shifts. The light folds around you like silk, neither bright nor dim. The stillness is immense, but comforting. You begin to notice small movements again, fine dust drifting up, crystals forming on your boots, the faint shimmer of distant heat. The longer you sit, the more the world seems to breathe again, just slowly, too slowly for impatient minds to notice. You imagine what this twilight would look like from space. One half of Earth glowing dimly gold, the other washed in deep blue shadow. Between them, a wide band of dusk encircling the globe. Perhaps that's what defines this age. Not light or darkness, but the horizon itself, stretched into eternity. You remember a story told by ancient astronomers, how at the beginning of everything, before there were days and nights, light and darkness were mixed together, indistinguishable. Maybe this is a return to that primordial calm. The planet's long twilight feels like a mirror of its first dawn, gentle, suspended, waiting for transformation. You stand again and start walking toward the sun's resting place. The air ahead wavers with subtle colors, a gradient of orange fading into gray-blue. Dust motes glint around you like tiny planets orbiting invisible suns. Each one catches light briefly before vanishing. You take a breath and notice that even your shadow feels slower, following you reluctantly, as if it too is adjusting to the drag of time. You smile. It's comforting in its way. Everything here moves with patience. The horizon darkens slightly, though you know the sun won't set for days. Still, the temperature drops. A thin layer of frost begins to form on the rocks, glowing faintly under the low light. You realize you've entered the narrow boundary where day and night coexist, the twilight belt that circles the world endlessly. You stop, feeling the cold reach your fingertips. Then
They look for the moon, and at first you don't find it. The long twilight has a way of hiding familiar things, folding edges into haze until even memories blur. Then you tilt your head, and there it is, small, pale, a polished seed set in violet glass. It feels farther away than you remember, not just smaller, but quieter, like a bell whose sound has thinned with distance. You watch it and realize you're seeing time made visible. The collapsing noon that does not truly collapse, but recedes, losing its grip on tides and stories until the pull becomes mostly memory. You begin to walk again, following a line of frost that glows along the ridge. The air is so thin that sound falls short of your ears, but you still know the moon's presence the way you knew the last rain was near and the equatorial ice was bright. For billions of years, the moon tugged gently at the oceans, slow dancing water around the planet, carving estuaries, nursing coastal marshes where early land life found a daily rhythm. Even now, with oceans withdrawn and the sky turned almost to glass, you imagine that old cadence still faintly tapping at the planet's crust. Lullabies without water, tides made of stress alone. You remember a simple fact that once felt like trivia and now feels like fate. The moon recedes from Earth by a few centimeters each year, about the rate your fingernails grow. Laser pulses bounced off mirrors left on its surface measured that drift in your age. Long before lasers, ancient shorelines recorded it in stone. In thick beds of tidal rhythmites, layered silt that keeps count like a metronome, geologists read an older drumbeat. More tides per month, more days per year, shorter days. The moon has been walking away all along, lengthening the day as it went, turning brisk twilights into the stretched hush you now inhabit. You glance down at the ground, where dust has settled into soft rings. They look like fossil waves, scalloped and evenly spaced. A callback surfaces, the quiet basin where the last brine glimmered, where you knelt to watch diatom glass drink the dying light. Those rings were once shaped by water jostled by the moon. These by wind that learned the same patience. Different sculptors, same lullaby. The moon itself shows a face you know, the same hemisphere. That constancy is a comfort. You remember that the moon is tidally locked to Earth, spinning once each orbit, so that one side forever gazes home. You trace familiar mares with your eyes, seas that are not seas, basalt plains poured from ancient wounds. Somewhere there, long ago, astronauts came home dusted in gray, describing a smell like spent gunpowder when moon dust met warm air inside their craft. A tiny, human quirk of chemistry and memory. You think of that now as a tender, odd relic. The moon smelling of something earthling only when we carried bits of it back to breathe on. The light shifts. The sun behind you hums in copper, and the moon's edges brighten briefly, then dim. Its orbit has widened over eons. Its influence on Earth's tilt has slackened. Back when blue still filled the sky and clouds moved with intention, the moon steadied the planet's obliquity, keeping seasons within tolerable bounds. Without that steady hand, the axis can wander. Perhaps that wandering helped draw equatorial ice like a sash. Perhaps it stretched day into months. You don't need to assign blame. Geology doesn't take it personally, but you note the consequence. A quieter, stranger Earth that drifts between angles of light. You think about the moon's future in two directions at once, because the end of things often branches. In one path, the moon keeps walking away as the days lengthen. In another, something changes. As the sun swells and spills mass into the system, solar tides and drag complicate the old two-body story. You've read speculations, elegant equations turned into soft possibilities, that the moon might one day stop receding, then begin to drift inward, its orbit decaying as the balance of tides reverses. If, in those distant ages, it crosses too near, Earth's gravity could shred it inside the Roche limit, drawing a ring from old companion stone. You picture it, our sky wearing a pale, fragile halo where once a single lamp hung. Which path wins? No one knows. It's an open question that feels like poetry. Does the last lullaby fade outward or circle back as a whispering ring? You sit on a low boulder and try to feel the tide in your bones. There's no surf to translate force into music now, no salt to carry the moon's touch. And yet, your body remembers how evenings once sounded. The slow push and pull on shores, the sigh over pebbled beaches. Somewhere under this dust, ancient coastlines sleep. In carbonate cliffs and buried deltas, the moon's handwriting remains. Each notch a timestamp, each shellbed a diary of gravity's patience. Above, a faint shimmer crosses the moon's limb. Liberation, the subtle nod that lets you peek past its fixed face. It is small, a trek of geometry and orbit, but it feels like a greeting. The moon has always fooled us kindly, showing a little more than less, as if to say nothing is entirely static, not even constancy. You follow that shimmer and think of another small fact. The moon quakes. In your time, seismometers left on the surface recorded tremors caused by tides and by the temperature swing of lunar day into night. Even in silence, the moon had a pulse. Perhaps it still does, quiet and sparse, a slow settling of an old body that refuses to be perfectly still. The night that isn't night deepens, and the moon brightens against the thinned air. You remember the thin sky's transparency, how stars push through daylight now, and you look for companion lights. Some constellations linger, skewed by their long drift. The moon glides among them like a modest lantern, not the ruler of tides so much as a witness to their end. You wonder what it sees when it looks back at Earth, a surface that has forgotten oceans, a belt of gentle ice at the equator, a sunlit haze turned amber by age. Maybe, if stones can remember, the moon carries a million reflections of blue it once pulled upon, held like polished thoughts in every bead of glass. The light shifts. The evening that isn't night deepens, and the moon brightens against the thinned air. You remember the thin sky's transparency, how stars push through daylight now, and you look for companion lights. Some constellations linger, skewed by their long drift. The moon glides among them like a modest lantern, not the ruler of tides so much, but a witness to their end. You wonder what it sees when it looks back at Earth, a surface that has forgotten oceans, a belt of gentle ice at the equator, a sunlit haze turned amber by age.
Maybe, if stones can remember, the moon carries 1,000,000 reflections of.
The air seems lighter again, emptied somehow, as if each breath the planet takes becomes harder to find. You stand in the same twilight, but something subtle has changed. The sound of your footsteps fades faster. The wind no longer whistles between stones. It simply moves and is gone. You tilt your head upward and see that even the thin halo around the sun has dimmed. What little atmosphere remains is beginning to unravel. The atmosphere unravels. You walk through a shallow basin where rocks lie half buried under frost. They're etched with thin, parallel grooves, marks left by ancient winds when air still had weight enough to sculpt. You kneel beside one and trace the grooves with your fingers. The edges crumble into dust that doesn't rise. There's too little air to carry it. The silence feels absolute now. Not the pause between sounds, but the absence of any medium that could hold them. The planet's breath is leaving. You recall what happens when magnetic fields die. The upper atmosphere, no longer shielded from the solar wind, begins to slip away. Molecule by molecule, it leaks into space, torn from gravity's grasp by radiation and charge. Mars suffered the same fate billions of years ago. Its core cooled, its magnetosphere vanished, and its once dense air was stripped into the void. The same process has come here, delayed but inevitable. You can almost feel it above you, the faint electric hush of ions leaving home. You imagine what it would look like from orbit. Thin veils of gas drifting outward in long spirals, glowing faintly under the sun's flare. To any distant eye, Earth might resemble a fading comet, its tail not made of ice, but of air. You walk on. The light trembles around you, as though the horizon itself shivers. You notice that colors have grown muted again, less blue, more silver. Scattering fades as the gases thin. Soon there will be no color at all, only the raw clarity of unfiltered sunlight. You realize how deeply the atmosphere once shaped beauty. Sunsets, clouds, rainbows, even the softness of distance. All were illusions of density. Without them, the world turns sharp, glass-like. Your footsteps lead you across a plain of bare rock streaked with metallic sheen. Iron minerals here oxidized long ago, but now exposed to relentless solar radiation, they've begun to bleach. You bend and pick up a fragment. It feels lighter than it should, as if air once filled its pores and has now been drawn away.
You turn it in your hand, watching it shimmering faintly. Under the weakened sky, even stone begins to feel hollow. You remember that oxygen itself was never guaranteed. It was a gift from the first photosynthesizing organisms, cyanobacteria, that turned sunlight into breath. Before them, the air was methane and carbon dioxide. Then came the great oxygenation, the rusting of the planet, the transformation of oceans and skies. Now the opposite is happening, the deoxygenation of a world returning to chemical stillness. You glance up again. The sky looks closer. Stars glitter even in what should be daylight, sharp as pinpricks through glass. You can see Venus faintly, glowing like a pearl in the haze. Its thick atmosphere still holds for now, but even that world, too, will someday yield to the solar wind. Nothing holds forever. A flicker of movement catches your eye. High above, a thin aurora glimmers, faintly green and red, though there is hardly enough gas to sustain it. The solar wind still finds particles to excite, painting its farewell across the sky. You smile at the persistence of beauty, even in decay. It feels like watching the last breath of art. As you continue walking, you begin to feel lighter. Gravity hasn't changed, but buoyancy has. With so little air to press against your body, every step feels exaggerated, as though the ground releases you reluctantly. You move slowly, like a dream figure, crossing the boundary between worlds. You remember a curious fact. Even now, in your own age, Earth loses around 90 tons of atmosphere to space every day. Hydrogen bleeding upward, helium slipping away. But the planet replenishes it through volcanic outgassing and life's metabolism. Here, both sources have dwindled. The balance has shifted irrevocably. You stop beside a fissure in the plain. Warm air seeps from below, rising weakly before fading into nothing. Once, these gases might have formed weather. Now, they vanish into vacuum. You crouch beside the crack, feeling the faint tremor of escaping heat. Each molecule that leaves carries memory. Nitrogen forged in ancient stars, oxygen born of sunlight on leaves, carbon exhaled by creatures long gone. You whisper a quiet thanks to them all. Above, the aurora fades. The stars brighten. You realize night and day no longer matter here. Without atmosphere, light is either direct or absent. There are no gradients, no twilight soft enough to separate. You glance toward the horizon, where a faint blue rim still clings to the edge of space, the last vestige of the sky. It shimmers briefly, then flickers out. You remember how astronauts once described that rim as the most fragile thing they'd ever seen, a paper-thin film separating life from emptiness. You think of those words now, understanding them not as metaphor, but as prophecy. The sky has unstitched itself, and with it goes the boundary between Earth and everything else. The air around you feels too still to breathe, too thin to hold warmth. The last winds have fallen silent. You stretch out your hand and imagine tracing their paths, the trade winds, the monsoons, the jet streams that once circled the world like invisible rivers. Now all gone. Their memory lingers only in the dunes, the dust, and the soft polish of stone. A question forms quietly in your mind. When a planet exhales for the last time, does it sigh? You almost think you hear it, a sound so low it's closer to vibration than tone. Maybe it's just your heartbeat echoing through your ears.
The world beneath your feet has turned still, but not empty. You sense it before you see it, a faint vibration in the stone, a rhythm slower than any heartbeat. It's not the wind, not the hum of the core, not the echo of lost oceans. It's subtler, it's the whisper of persistence. You follow it until you reach a hollow in the plain, a shallow basin filled with fractured rock that glows faintly under the bare sunlight. You stop. The warmth here feels different, measured, deliberate, alive. The last echo of life. You crouch, letting your hand rest against the stone. It's warm, even though the air is cold. The heat comes from within, not from fire, but from metabolism. You brush away dust, revealing thin, dark filaments threading through mineral veins. They move slightly, flexing under the light. For a moment, you think it's an illusion, the shimmer of heat waves, but then one bends toward the shadow, away from the glare. It's alive. It shouldn't surprise you. Life, on every scale, has always been adept at retreat. When sunlight scorched, it dove into the sea. When the oceans vanished, it sank into rock. When air grew thin, it learned to live without it. Even now, in this skeletal world, it endures, not as forests or beasts, but as a fine, persistent film woven through the bones of the planet. You peer closer and notice that the filaments form networks, connecting cracks and fissures like neural tissue across stone. They glisten with faint color, opal blues, subtle greens. You recognize the chemistry, biofilms feeding on mineral energy, perhaps powered by radiolysis, where natural radiation splits molecules and releases electrons to harvest, a process ancient, patient, tireless. In your own time, scientists found microbes sealed inside salt crystals older than some continents, revived after 250 million years of dormancy. They found others thriving in the cores of nuclear reactors, feeding on radiation that would kill all else. You imagine descendants of those same lineages surviving here, their DNA a chronicle of adaptation. You take a careful breath,
though there's nothing in the air to carry scent. Still, you imagine one, a metallic tang, faintly sweet, like ozone over wet stone. The smell of chemistry still in motion. The basin stretches ahead, a mosaic of rock and dust shot through with faint light. You realize the glow isn't just reflection, it pulses. Each patch brightens and dims in slow rhythm, like an organism exhaling through stone. The timing isn't uniform. It ripples outward in waves, as if communication travels across the mineral matrix. Life's last conversation, perhaps, quiet, continuous, unreadable. You recall a phrase from an old textbook, Gaia hypothesis, the idea that Earth once functioned as a self-regulating organism, life and planet intertwined in feedback and balance. You wonder if that's what this is now, a memory of that dialogue, reduced to whispers through quartz veins and silicate threads. A final homeostasis, more reflex than intention. You move closer and trace a finger along one glowing strand. It flickers at your touch, withdrawing slightly, then stabilizing again. You think of phototaxis, the tendency of life to respond to light, to turn toward or away from brightness. Even here, under the dying sun, instinct remains, the will to adjust, however faint. A soft vibration hums through the stone beneath your palm. It's low, continuous, almost inaudible. You realize it's not mechanical, but biological. The sound of microscopic movement amplified through mineral. Billions of tiny processes, each one insignificant, yet together forming a low, constant tone, the sound of the planet thinking. You sit down among the fissures, feeling the hum through your spine. The light pulses in front of you, faint but rhythmic. It feels meditative, like the world itself is reciting a mantra too ancient to translate. You imagine what these organisms might think if thought can exist at this scale. Perhaps they don't remember the sun, or the seas, or forests, but maybe they carry traces of it in chemistry, fragments of long encoded instinct. You pick up a small shard of mineral and notice that it glows faintly too. Embedded inside are darker inclusions, tiny spheroids, maybe dormant spores or preserved spores. You roll the shard in your fingers, feeling its texture, smooth but alive. It's humbling, holding the sum of everything that's left, life reduced to simplicity, but undefeated. You think about the irony of it all. For millennia, humanity looked outward for other worlds, for signs of life in the universe. Mars, Europa, Enceladus, places where heat and chemistry might meet. And yet, in Earth's far twilight, this planet itself has become what it once sought elsewhere, a frozen, airless world, harboring hidden pockets of endurance beneath its crust. A microcosm of what the cosmos likely holds in abundance. You look up, though there's no sky anymore, only open sky. The stars stare back, steady and close. Somewhere among them, other worlds turn, some bright, some dark. You wonder if any of them carry life like this, faint, stubborn, singing in silence. The hum in the stone deepens, or maybe your perception sharpens. You begin to distinguish patterns within it, pauses, accelerations, tiny fluctuations that feel intentional.
You imagine this network communicating, passing chemical messages from node to node, sustaining itself through coordination. Perhaps it's not just surviving, but recording, translating, preserving, the final library of Earth, written in molecules instead of language. You feel a sudden tenderness for it, the smallest of beings carrying the weight of continuity. You whisper softly, "You've done well." The sound doesn't travel, but the light beneath your hand flares once, just slightly, as if answering. You stay there for a long time, unmoving, letting the quiet rhythm sync with your own. The border between you and the planet blurs until you feel part of it, stone, warmth, vibration. You realize that this is what survival means at the very end, not conquest or progress, but stillness. As the light above you shifts, amber fading into pale silver, you know you've seen the final heartbeat of a living Earth. Not its death, but its transformation. The planet is no longer a cradle for life. It has become life, condensed, elemental, dreaming in the dark. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your hands. The faint glow remains, pulsing patiently beneath the stone. You take one last look before turning away. The hum continues. The echo endures. The earth remembers itself.
You walk until even the faint vibration beneath your feet quiets, and the warmth that once seeped from the stone gives way to a calm, unchanging cold. The land ahead is smooth, no ridges, no valleys, no lines of fault or fracture. The last traces of movement have settled. For the first time in its long history, Earth no longer shifts or bros or breathes. You stop at the edge of this endless plain and understand what you are seeing. Earth has become a stone. It is not lifeless in spirit, but still in every other way. The crust has thickened. The mantle, long starved of heat, has hardened into crystalline stillness. The once molten core is now iron frost. Its convection ended, its magnetic whisper gone. You press your hand to the surface and feel nothing. Not even the faint pulse of deep warmth you once sensed in the caverns. The world's heart has cooled. You take a few steps forward. The ground sings faintly beneath your weight, not from motion, but from resonance. The rock here is dense, glass-like, silicates fused into a smooth shell over millions of centuries. The landscape gleams faintly under starlight, not dull gray, but iridescent, reflecting subtle colors, violet, bronze, and soft blue. In the far distance, you see the faint curvature of the planet rising like the lip of a vast bowl. The sky is motionless. The sun has drifted farther in your mind than in space, its light dimmed through exhaustion. The stars burn sharp and close, their reflections dancing in the polished surface at your feet. You realize that the Earth now mirrors the cosmos, a quiet twin to the void around it. The planet has become what it once admired, another celestial body adrift among many. You kneel and brush away a thin layer of dust. Beneath it lies perfection, a mineral lattice smooth as glass, woven from the remnants of mountains, oceans, and forests, all reduced, fused, reimagined. The atoms beneath your hand are old carbon, old calcium, old silica, rearranged into new bonds that will outlast any trace of biology. You think of the last organisms you saw, their faint glow deep in the rock, and realize that in time they too will crystallize, their carbon woven into this eternal surface. Even life becomes geology, given patience. You glance toward the horizon. No atmosphere softens the line where the world meets the void. The edge glows faintly blue, not from air, but from fluorescence, the rock itself releasing stored radiation, a ghostly aurora born of minerals, remembering warmth. The planet's own bones are luminous now. You remember something from an old scientific article, how in deep time silicon and oxygen would dominate what remains of the crust, forming minerals more stable than any living structure. Earth would outlast even the star that birthed it, drifting cold and inert for eons after the sun's final flare. You are watching that transformation already in progress. You wander across the plain, and each step carries the faintest sound, like glass humming under tension. There is a strange serenity in the uniformity. No cliffs to climb, no rivers to cross, no sky to gauge the hour. Only light and reflection, matter and memory. The world has achieved a kind of perfection through stillness. You pause to look upward. The moon, small, pale, still drifting outward, casts a fine silver sheen across the stone. Its light no longer bends through air. It falls pure, untouched, sharp-edged. For the first time, you see shadows that are absolute, black without gradation. You trace your own silhouette and find it crisp as a cut. There is something both beautiful and final in that clarity. A faint idea comes to you, gentle and humbling, that planets do not die. They transform. The word death implies absence, but this is presence, in another form, solid, complete, endless. Every atom that once composed rain, tree, or thought remains here, rearranged into the language of minerals. The world is quieter, yes, but not gone. You run your hand across the rock again. Its surface is faintly warm, though there is no sun above. Radioactive isotopes buried deep within still decay slowly, releasing traces of energy. It's not enough to move the crust or stir the air, but enough to whisper continuity. Even in stone, the planet murmurs. You sit down and let the silence settle around you. There is no wind, no vibration, no ticking of time, only the faint pressure of your body against the ground. You close your eyes and imagine all that came before, condensed into this calm. The roaring magma seas, the green ages of forests, the migrations of animals, the architectures of cities. You can almost hear them faintly in the hum of memory,
the low chorus of existence folded into matter. When you open your eyes, the stars seem brighter. You think of how once humans looked up from this same world and dreamed of other stones, other skies. They left messages on golden records, sent ships into silence, built telescopes to peer back through time. You wonder if any of that remains, perhaps fused into this surface, turned to minerals alongside mountains and bones. The human story, too, has joined the geology of everything. You lie back on the cool stone, letting the universe settle into view. The planet beneath you no longer spins quickly, but it does move, slowly, elegantly, tracing its final orbit like a note held too long. The stars glide overhead in imperceptible procession. You realize there is no loneliness here, only continuity. The Earth is no longer a place of beginnings, but of keeping. It holds the record of all that was, written in mineral light. You rest your palm flat against the surface once more, and in that stillness you feel gratitude for heat, for rain, for movement, for sound, for all the temporary things that once danced across this eternal body. Now those motions have found their rest. The planet sleeps, dreamless but complete. Its stone glows softly, reflecting starlight that has traveled 1,000 years to arrive and will travel 1,000 more when it leaves again. You whisper into the silence, "Thank you for the long story." The echo that answers is not sound, but warmth, the faint reminder that endings are simply slower forms of living. Earth has become a stone, and in doing so, it has become eternal.
You lie very still on the cooled planet, and the sky above you widens until it becomes less a dome and more a tendency, space leaning outward in all directions, everything loosening, everything letting go. The stars look nearer for a while, then farther, then simply fewer. You notice the emptiness between them is growing, and you remember a fact you learned long ago. The universe doesn't just expand, it accelerates, as if driven by a quiet pressure we call dark energy. You feel it only in the consequence, the way constellations you loved drift apart, the way the night becomes a map of departures. You sit up and watch the sun, a blurred coin now, a tired lantern, and you follow, in thought, the ages beyond it. The last starlight will not come from giants or bright blue extravagance, but from humble red dwarfs burning with frugality, sipping hydrogen for trillions of years. They will take their time, and then they too will cool. The universe's brightness will slip into embers, then into memory. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind and makes you smile in this silence. Some theorists playfully predict that in inconceivably distant futures, black dwarfs, stellar corpses cooled to darkness, could, through fantastically slow quantum tunneling, explode in lonely supernova, brief sparks after 10 to the 100 years. A joke of time or a serious footnote? The math allows a whisper. The universe enjoys whispers. You rise and begin to walk, though motion here is symbolic. The ground beneath you is storyless stone. The air is gone. The light is factual. Still, you keep a pace, because the mind moves best when the feet pretend there is somewhere to go. You think about matter itself, about protons in your old textbooks. Will they decay? Some grand unified theories say yes, sometime around 10 to the 34th years or beyond. And other frameworks say no, that protons may endure. It remains an open question, and you find comfort in that uncertainty, like a single candle left burning in a room that has otherwise chosen darkness. You turn your attention outward, galaxies fleeing to horizons you can't visit. It reminds you of standing beside the last rain and watching droplets vanish before they touched the ground. Expansion feels like that now. Departures that do not arrive anywhere. Only new distances written between points. As you remember from the long twilight, even time can slow into a stretched breath. Here it stretches more. Photons redshift until their wavelengths outgrow your imagination, humming as radio ghosts so long they barely deserve the word wave. The cosmic microwave background, once a warm relic of birth, thins into a colder whisper, then into a principle you trust more than a signal you receive. You kneel, place your palm on stone, and revisit your quiet companions underground, the biofilms that glowed and pulsed, the patient libraries of mineral thought. Perhaps by now, they too have merged with the lattice, their carbon braided into quartz sentences, their once living geometry retained as ornament. The callback comforts you. Life chose to persist as a tempo, not a shape. Above you, black holes become the last architects of structure. They gather what remains, then leak it as soft Hawking radiation, like faint warmth escaping through wool. A long, generous exhale. Even gravity, the most faithful storyteller, ends its tale as a lullaby. You look for the moon one more time, small and silver, the master of departures. It keeps its distance, still tidally locked, still patient, though one day even it will be an unremarkable stone reflecting a light no one calls daylight. You remember tidal rhythmites and fossil estuaries, and the way old coastlines kept count for us when we didn't yet know what to count. You whisper thanks to everything that measured time. Rings in trees, layers in ice, pulses in starlight, clicks of cesium. You realize you no longer need them. The clock you carry now is the calm acceptance of ends. A thin question visits, the kind that asks you to sit rather than to solve. What is kept when everything loosens? Perhaps information hides in correlations, encoded in the subtle arrangements of the smallest things. Perhaps it evaporates with the last horizon, written no longer in the universe, but in the gratitude of those who witnessed it. The black hole paradox once dared physicists to argue with black holes.
They argued tenderly, as friends debate poetry. You recall their careful work, their chalk dust, the way equations can feel like weather. You smile, because even debates become lullabies when the hour is late enough. You lie back again and let the night recompose itself around you. The earth, now a reflective instrument, holds you like a note, and you listen for harmonics. Way back when the atmosphere was thin and halos were silver, you learned how a planet sings by being sculpted, by wind across sastrugi, by rain that never quite arrived, by glaciers humming, by caverns dripping. Now the song is simpler and deeper, the resonance of being a thing that remains. You think of the granite spire you leaned on in the land where mountains turned to dust, how it felt alive with time, if not with life. The whole planet has become that spire. The universe has become that planet. You follow the faintest future. After the stars, after the black holes, there is the slow arithmetic of heat-death, the evening out of energy, the perfection of distribution. No gradients left to push change forward. This end isn't cruel, it is thorough. The cosmos learns stillness as the final form of fairness. You test the thought for sadness and find instead a kind of spacious relief. As you noticed among the eroded peaks, even the tallest things want rest. You give yourself to long memory. You recall the first invitation you spoke aloud tonight, glaciers whispering, starlight over shifting continents, the promise that you could wander safely. You kept that promise. You touched brine that shone like eyes. You traced the sky's forgetting of blue. You blessed a storm that almost was. You thanked a sun that worked too hard. You walked the equator and heard ice sing. You climbed below and listened to life fold itself into a hush. You watched the moon rehearse departure and the atmosphere choose the door. You held the last glow of living chemistry, then watched a planet find peace as stone. There is nothing left to fix about this story. There never was. You look at your hands, symbolic hands, dreamed hands, and you flex them once, as if turning the page. Beyond decay or dawn, you remain. That is the whole sentence. Not as a body with errands, not as opinion or urgency, but as witness and